He appeared to be a successful Welsh entrepreneur, but he hid a dark secret.
I just wouldn't have thought that he had that much hatred in him.
Saiful Sujan funded a terrorism network.
He was one of the key architects of the global money-moving operation of ISIS.
The Americans were so worried about his influence, they killed him in a targeted drone strike.
Now that he's dead, ISIL has lost a key link between their networks.
It's not only going after the bullets and bombs, but it's also going after the financiers, using drone missiles to be able to neutralize those threats as well.
I've travelled thousands of miles piecing together Sujan's network. I find out that his influence continues even after his death.
Se han necesitado casi 6 años y la colaboración de 4 países para neutralizar sus actividades.
And my search leads me back to Wales and a former business partner. Did he have a part in the terrorism network? Saiful Sujan was a hard-working, unassuming entrepreneur. An established part of the Bangladeshi community in South Wales, he'd studied here and set up his own businesses. He lived on this street in Pontypridd with his wife and their young son. He ran an IT business and appeared to be doing well. But what no one in this South Wales community appeared to realise was that Saiful Sujan was a supporter of the so-called Islamic State. He helped develop weapon systems for ISIS and financed some of their terror activities. His influence was widespread. Using the internet and money from his Welsh company, he was able to communicate and conspire with ISIS supporters across the world. American officials were so concerned by Saiful Sujan, a man they'd identified as a senior Islamic State operative, they killed him in an airstrike in Syria at the end of 2015.
Sujan was an external operations planner who was educated as a computer systems engineer in the United Kingdom. He supported ISIL's hacking efforts, their anti-surveillance technology, and their weapons development. Now that he's dead, ISIL has lost a key link between their networks.
But that's not the end of the story. Sujan's influence continues to be felt around the world. He's been linked to IS militants and operations in Bangladesh, Spain and Wales. Sujan enrolled at the former Glamorgan University in 2007 to study for a degree in computer engineering. Prior to that, it's believed he'd lived in London before putting down roots in the Pontypridd area.
The house was three-bedroom townhouse with a garage.
Rob Rees met him several times in 2005 after Sujan said he wanted to buy his house in Rhydyfelin. He eventually moved in November of that year.
I mean, he explained that he'd met his wife at his brother's wedding, and 2 brothers married 2 sisters, and how much he was in love with his wife and how much she loved the look of the house on the photograph. She couldn't wait to come to the UK.
How did he come across to you? Was he quite friendly?
He was the sort of person you wanted to put your arm around and sort of take under your wing, and that's what we did a little bit, my wife and myself. We sort of felt sorry for him almost straight away. But it being a student, he had like 2 or 3 jobs, and that's how he was making ends meet. You know, I don't know when the guy found time to sleep, to be honest with you, because he was working. If he wasn't working, he was studying, and you know, and that's what he was like.
Sujan's business enterprises appeared to take off. His brother, Ata-ul Haq, had also come to the UK and was also involved in helping to run his expanding business empire. And Sujan joined the Wales-Bangladesh Chamber of Commerce. He ran his first business, IT company Ibax Limited, from his home near Pontypridd. But then he moved to offices here in the Roath area of Cardiff. He became an accepted member of the Bangladeshi community, and those who came across him thought he'd go far.
He didn't seem religious. He was more sort of focused on business and making money. That's what it seemed like to me. He was driven, you know, to make something, to make a name of himself. And that's how it came across, you know, nothing else. He was very smart, very intelligent.
Although Enam, a restaurant owner in South Wales, wasn't a close friend, he did get an invite to Sujan's wedding party, as he happened to be in Bangladesh at the time.
Well, it wasn't a conservative wedding. It was very, it was modern. There was sort of mingling, you know. There wasn't no separation, women one side, men on the other side. It was nothing like that, you know. As if you'd gone to a wedding in this country.
He didn't come from this sort of traditional conservative family as far as you can see.
Definitely not, no.
We can't be sure what turned Saifar Sujan, a relatively quiet but driven businessman, into a supporter of so-called Islamic State. Several people who knew him have told us that he was profoundly affected by the death of his brother's first wife. But whether this was the trigger for his radicalisation, we simply don't know. And we may never know. After 11 years in the UK and mostly in South Wales, Sujan left the country in 2014. But his Welsh businesses remained. His brother, Ataul Haq, would end up in Spain. Sujan told people who knew him that he was going to Bangladesh to set up a fabric business. After a brief time there, it's believed he then travelled to Turkey before entering Syria and joining up with ISIS. But his influence also spread to the eastern United States. One of Sujan's companies, based in Cardiff, was found to have sent money to a man living in the city of Baltimore. Newspaper delivery man Mohammed El-Shinawi lived in this working-class suburb just outside Baltimore. Now, he didn't know that by the summer of 2015, he was under FBI surveillance. And when they used a warrant to search his house in October of that year, they found evidence that linked him to Saifar Sujan and his company in South Wales. The FBI investigation found that Sujan's Welsh company was sending money to their man in America, Mohammed El-Shinawi, to fund a terrorist attack in the United States.
It was relatively small quantities. You're talking about $1,000, $500 here and there, transferred through MoneyGram, Western Union.
Terrorism academic Seamus Hughes has followed the case of El-Shinawi for more than a year. In total, the FBI says El-Shinawi was sent $7,700 by Sujan's Welsh company. And not only was he being sent funds for a terrorist attack, he was being given step-by-step instructions by ISIS on how to carry it out.
So you have these individuals that are directing El-Shinawi to commit an attack. And so the first communication was, go kill an individual in Texas. And when El-Shinawi wasn't able to get that all together, they said, okay, well, why don't you transfer and focus your efforts on committing a large-scale attack in Baltimore.
El-Shinawi discussed a bombing campaign that, in his words, would kill a lot of people. And he researched several federal buildings here in Baltimore, including this United States courthouse. It's believed Saifar Sujan sent El-Shinawi at least 16 bomb-making videos with a request that he make a peroxide bomb. This kind of bomb has been used repeatedly by terrorists. It's thought to have been used in last year's attack on the Manchester Arena, as well as terror atrocities in both Paris and Brussels. Well, nobody lives here these days, but one of El-Shenawi's former neighbours told me off camera that he was a regular guy, a friendly man who lived here with his wife and showed no outward signs of extremism. But on the day of his arrest, the police and FBI took no chances, and they flooded this entire area with vehicles and agents. After an investigation lasting more than 2 years, and after admitting a number of terrorism charges, El-Shenawi was finally jailed for 20 years. Judge Ellen Hollander said he'd been playing with a very sophisticated group of people.
It's a level of sophistication I don't think most analysts expected from ISIS. This is very unique. This is using shell companies. It's sending money across a number of different countries. It's the only known ISIS-funded plot in the US. I think the FBI, as they're building this case, are unpeeling that onion and realizing they have a really serious network here that I don't think we had a full understanding of when we first started.
It was while executing a search warrant at El-Shenawi's home that FBI agents came across the link to Saif al-Sujan and his Welsh company. In a desk drawer, they found a handwritten note, and on the note were details of a MoneyGram transfer for just over £1,000. But it was the sender's name that led FBI investigators to Wales. The person who tried to send money to the States was a businessman from Newport, Abdul Samad. He describes himself as a young entrepreneur who also enjoys basketball and Arabic studies. Crucially, Mr. Samad worked at a company run by Saif al-Sujan and his brother Ataul Haq. He says he began his career answering the phone at one of Sujan's businesses and went on to become a director at a number of his companies. On the same day, in December 2015, that Saif al-Sujan was killed in an American airstrike, police in Wales arrested Abdul Samad on suspicion of terrorism offences. His home here in Newport was searched, along with the company offices in Cardiff. During the court case in America, the FBI claims it found evidence that Samad supported the so-called Islamic State and facilitated payments to ISIS supporter El-Shenawi in the USA. They also claim he was involved in organising the buying of equipment for ISIS. These papers outline Samad's role in buying various pieces of equipment that the FBI alleges were destined for the Islamic State. They include parts for aerial drones and $18,000 worth of military-grade surveillance equipment. We wanted to check if there was evidence to back the FBI's claim that Samad supported the ideology of the Islamic State. On his Facebook site, we found a number of posts that would appear to give credence to the claim that Abdul Samad supported Islamic extremism. He shared this video in which various speakers make the case for an Islamic State.
What is it going to take? How much do we have to lose of our humanity before we wake up? How much more? How much can you take? How much can you fill your heart with how much pollution?
He also posted this video, which is encouraging Muslims to become martyrs on the battlefield. And in this video, there's a tribute to a high-ranking Al-Qaeda member who Samad describes as a role model for the 21st century. The FBI also says that some of Samad's computers and other hard drives in the IBAC's office were found to contain a large quantity of Islamic State and Al-Qaeda propaganda. 15 months after his arrest, counter-terrorism police told Samad the threshold had not been met for him to be charged with any offences. He has denied any wrongdoing or holding radical views, having any knowledge of a plot to fund attacks in the USA, and he claims to have only ordered legitimate equipment for the company. Since then, we've discovered that Samad has had relatively recent links to Ata-ul-Haq, who, as well as being Sujan's brother and business partner, would also become a terrorism suspect. Just last September, Samad set up a new company in Newport. It's called Icingtel, the same name as a Spanish company run by Haq. And it's not just the company name they share. The two sole shareholders of the new Welsh firm are Haq and his wife. Haq is now under investigation by police in Spain. I come to Merida, some 200 miles southwest of Madrid. It was here last September the detectives closed in on one of the last key players in a suspected terror network that spanned 3 continents. Officers from the National Police Force's investigation unit made their move, arresting Ata-ul-Haq after an 18-month operation. The police inspector investigating Haq agreed to speak to me about the case for the first time, on condition of anonymity due to the nature of his work.
Ata-ul-Haq fue sometido a una vigilancia con los mejores recursos de la Comisaría General de Información. Fue vigilado durante 24 horas porque conocíamos que su hermano había sido un líder muy destacado del ISIS.
Haq had lived in South Wales for a number of years, at the same time as his brother Saif al-Sujan. But when Sujan went to Syria to join the so-called Islamic State, Haq ended up here with his Spanish wife.
¿Tú recuerdas de la operación policial que había aquí en septiembre?
Neighbours I spoke to here remembered the large police operation last September, but very few people knew Haq or his family, and they say Haq hardly ever left his flat. The Spanish police case against Haq is that he effectively carried on his brother's terrorism network. Using the new company Icingtel, it's alleged that Haq continued to fund ISIS terrorists.
Efectivamente, la empresa de Ataúl era legal, pero el destino de esos recursos, o parte del destino de esos recursos, estaban destinados a financiar económicamente y tecnológicamente al ISIS. Envió y organizó envíos de material tecnológico a Turquía. Y, por último, organizó y envió miles de dólares a terroristas en Bangladesh. Estimamos que en diciembre de 2015 Ataúl hace llegar de un total de $50.000 a Bangladesh. El destino de este dinero, según nuestros colegas bangladesíes, era estrictamente operativo para atentar.
Spanish police say Haq had also been following ISIS instructions on how to obtain and adapt drone equipment, a technique many fear could be used in domestic terrorist attacks.
Ataúl hizo un estudio muy detallado de las necesidades que de una parte tenía la organización con aquellos elementos que se encontraban disponibles en el mercado.
At the mercy of ISIS, there are 750,000 people still trapped inside Mosul. I reported on the threat from drones last year when they were being used by ISIS in Iraq. Even today, after the collapse of so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, the threat from drones just like these is very real. Available in shops and online, they can relatively easily be adapted for military purposes, and the likelihood of IS militants continuing to use them is being taken very seriously.
will see more use of drones by terrorists, not because ISIS lost control in Iraq or Syria, but because the technology is becoming more commonplace.
Peter Singer is an American strategist who's advised the US government on defense policy.
ISIS took drones and applied them to 3 related tasks. They used them for surveillance. The second thing is they linked it back to their propaganda campaigns. So they would capture footage of themselves carrying out a suicide car bomb or something like that. And then the third thing is they began to weaponize these drones. Initially pretty crude weapons, small bombs, and then they began to design them to be a little bit better and better.
Just last month, pro-ISIS supporters released a video which promoted attacking the World Cup in Russia. The network set up by Sujan appears to have left a lasting legacy, with his brother Atta ul-Haq being investigated for helping ISIS's drone program. Do you regard him as a highly dangerous individual?
Sí, posiblemente más peligroso que aquellas personas que públicamente muestran su voluntad de atentar, porque son más fácilmente neutralizables. Se han necesitado casi 6 años y la colaboración de 4 países para neutralizar sus actividades.
Haq is now in jail in Madrid and is expected to be charged later this year. He denies any wrongdoing or being involved in the terror network. On the same day that Haq was detained, police in Bangladesh arrested 11 men suspected of having links to the same terror network. It's believed the Dhaka-based cell could have been responsible for a number of terror attacks in the country. In Bangladesh, the authorities are reluctant to talk about Islamist terrorism and the existence in the country of so-called Islamic State. So I've come to Sweden to meet an exiled Bangladeshi journalist who's been covering the story of Saiful Sujan for many years.
After I was released, I could not live in the country.
Tasneem Khalil fled to Malmo 11 years ago after he was tortured by the authorities in Bangladesh, he says, after writing reports criticising them. From exile, Tasneem now writes extensively about terrorism in Bangladesh.
Saiful Sujan was the architect, or he was one of the key architects of the global money moving operation of ISIS. And we are actually talking about big sums of money. In Bangladesh, we know that he was instrumental in setting up the first phase of ISIS operations, which was recruitment of young men to the battlefields of Syria.
Sujan was even accused of radicalizing his children's private tutor.
Sujan actually converted him and sort of recruited him into becoming an influential figure in ISIS in Bangladesh.
How many jihadis did they recruit between them?
You know, like safe estimate would be like at least 50.
As well as recruiting jihadis, often through a page on Facebook, Cardiff businessman Sujan was also suspected of funding terrorist operations in Bangladesh to the tune of tens of thousands of pounds. There were several operations that were carried out, murders inside Bangladesh that could have been funded by Sujan's money.
There were a number of operations in the second half of 2015 which Bangladeshi intelligence agencies believe that were funded by Sujan's money.
Money from the network established by Sujan is also suspected of funding Bangladesh's worst terror attack in recent years. In July 2016, 24 people were killed when a cafe in Dhaka was targeted by terrorists armed with bombs and guns.
Even after his death, he remained very influential There is a very high likelihood that some of Shujan's money were used in those attacks also, or at least what's very clear is that the network he set up was being used for financing attacks even after his death. His main role was moving money, and which at times it sounds very boring, but that is like the core of any jihadi terrorist operation. And Shujan was the money manager for that cell.
Police in Bangladesh have declined to comment on terrorist attacks in the country. Fighting the funds behind terrorism has become a priority for law enforcement agencies across the world.
Finance and communications are the two biggest vulnerabilities for terrorists.
Dennis Lamel set up the FBI's terrorist financing section after the 9/11 attacks. He's not surprised the US military chose to kill Shujan with a drone strike.
Being a financier, especially somebody who moves a lot of money, is an important target. If you can move dollars and you can get dollars into the hands of people who are going to use that money for illicit activity and to build bombs or to carry out attacks, it is incredibly dangerous. And the more we can do to disrupt the flow of funds, the less likely they're going to be able to have successful attacks.
Newport businessman Abdul Samad was one of those accused by the FBI of being involved in moving funds for terrorism. We asked him to take part in our programme, but he declined, saying everything we wanted to know was online. But there were a number of serious allegations raised in this programme to put to him, such as why he set up a company for a man now suspected of terrorism. Hi, Abdul Samad. These are serious allegations against you. There's some new allegations about the company you opened last year. What about the company? What about the company you... Oh, yeah, Mr. Samad won't speak to us. He says these allegations are online, there's nothing new in them, and he won't respond to the new allegations that we've seen, the detailed accusations in those FBI documents. It appears that Saiful Shujan's network has been largely dismantled, but the threat from terrorists like Shujan remains, despite the demise of the so-called Islamic State.
This is in many ways a prototype of what's to come, especially as ISIS loses physical territory. They're going to move back into more of an al-Qaeda type of approach, which is shifting funding to supporters in the West and to encourage attacks.
I would say people like Shujan, they are now more important for the next generation of jihadi organizations that would succeed ISIS. If you kill the man, the machine actually survives.
In Wales, the death of Saiful Shujan and the reality that he was such a high-ranking figure in ISIS was not the first time a community here had to deal with such news. Wales has wrestled with the problem of radicalisation for nearly a decade now. A plot to blow up the London Stock Exchange involved men from Cardiff. And the city also saw 3 young men leave their homes and families to travel to Syria to join ISIS. The physical threat of the so-called Islamic State in the Middle East may be significantly diminished. But the continued fear of homegrown extremism hasn't gone away.